Ah, rhetoric, rhetoric. How shall I define thee, rhetoric? Let me count the ways. You may think that the formal language that I've just spoken is rhetoric, and it is a form of rhetoric. But rhetoric is much larger than just Shakespearean language or fancy rhetorical devices or any of the other things that you may think of when you think of rhetoric. At its heart, rhetoric is just the use of particular media, often words, but not exclusively words, to persuade an audience in the most effective way available to a given speaker or writer or graphic designer or combination of the above, or even user of other media forms. Rhetoric began as a linguistic skill. Early rhetoricians worked hard to make sure that they set their ideas in the most effective light for the audiences they addressed in each specific circumstance. Traditionally, they used appeals to authority and even appeals to reason and emotion to convince their audiences, often listeners, but occasionally also readers, that the ideas they presented were essential and that the actions for which they advocated must be pursued. These are known as ethos, logos, and pathos, and they will be the subject of a separate video. Other rhetorical devices use other forms of language to get similar ideas across. Some, like assonance and alliteration, rely on sounds of similarity to emphasize particular concepts. Others rely on figurative language, like metaphors and similes, to paint pictures to particular audiences. Others use devices like wordplay and repetition to underscore particular ideas or to show listeners and readers how essential a particular group of concepts are. Rhetoric isn't limited to language, although in your first essay from me you are going to be more limited to language just because the addition of other ideas can make a study of rhetoric even more complicated. But I do want you to be aware, as you start to look at rhetoric in words, that rhetoric can also be present in image. Some aspects of rhetoric are performative. Alliteration and assonance, for instance, are much more effective when spoken aloud than when observed on the printed page. Repetition, similarly, can be compounded with pauses to make itself much more known and felt in a verbal delivery. Even things like attire can play a role in rhetoric. The color of a politician's tie in Britain may symbolize his loyalty to a particular political party. Whether one dresses formally, as I have tried to do for you today, or comes in slouching in a baseball cap, blue jeans, and a hoodie to symbolize affiliation with a particular class or group of people, as someone might do if they wanted to be more approachable, is also in itself a form of rhetoric. And visual things like advertisements, such as those you might see on a billboard or even on your internet as you browse, can also use color, shape, location, even familiar fonts to display particular affinities. All of these cumulatively become rhetoric. Rhetoric is present in every communication that you have with another human being, and also in communications that you observe, such as advertisements where you don't necessarily have direct and instantaneous communication with the writer. In this essay, we're going to be stripping rhetoric back to its most basic elements. The forms of persuasion and the rhetorical devices used to make a particular speech or piece of writing most applicable to a particular audience. And I also hope, because I'm recording this in an election year and many of you will be watching it in an American election year, that you'll be using some of the things you learn about rhetoric as you delve into it for this essay, as you evaluate the candidates who are running for President of the United States this year. Each political party has its own particular slogans and forms of wordplay, even allusions. And if you watch things like the debates very closely, you'll notice that each politician is aligning himself with the messages of his particular party. Being aware of rhetoric is an essential part of reading critically and listening carefully and closely to the people around you. I hope that you'll find this essay useful as an introduction.